modern philosophers would call more existentially minded people. They were more interested in personal knowledge than intellectual knowledge. And so for them, for the Greeks, for instance, and Christianity adopted a lot of its philosophy from the Greeks, and sometimes that was good, sometimes that was bad. For instance, the fight between Galileo and the church was not over the Bible, it was over Aristotle. Aristotle is the one, and Ptolemy were the ones who said that the earth stood still and everything moved around the earth. The Bible didn't discuss that subject. Probably most people at the time the Bible was written would have had some similar view. But the Christian view is that the Bible was not written to people who were at the historical point where they could have understood science. So if Genesis 1, 2, and 3 had been written totally from a scientific perspective, nobody could have read it or understood it for more than 2,000 years. And also your point that connecting faith with any particular philosophy is sometimes helpful for the generations for which that philosophy or that science is preeminent. But when things change, when new knowledge comes in, then being connected to Aristotelian science is a drag, and it will split your culture and drag you down. And the same thing is true with being connected too diligently with any scientific theory, or more importantly, scientific philosophy. For instance, a lot of people don't realize it, but Charles Darwin was never an atheist. At the end of his life, he decided that he might be called an agnostic because that's the name that his friend Thomas Huxley invented. But even Thomas Huxley was not an atheist. They were worried because, just like at the time of Galileo, the church or religious people had connected themselves so much with the particular scientific view, namely Baconian science, that they were not able to allow even thought about other kinds of explanations. And the purpose of the theory of Darwin's theory of evolution is not to explain why human beings are here. It's just to describe the history of human beings from point A to point Z. And so it's put out as a hypothesis, and if there's enough scientific understanding that comes to it, then it becomes a kind of a working theory. And for most scientists in the world today, evolution of some kind, that is the changing of species and that kind of thing, is just so evident in the scientific record that there has to be some dealing with it by Christians. And they have been dealing with it, especially in England and America, for 150 years. And but there's still no consensus, even among scientists, of all of the facts of the theory of evolution, or of the origins of the universe. You know, just in my lifetime, we've gone from steady state theory to the theory of the Big Bang. That's just in my lifetime. In my lifetime, scientists have gone from believing that atom means something that cannot be split to splitting the atom. When I was born, the word atom meant something you can't split. When I was 5 years old, they split it. And so if you just tie yourself to science as if that were so important, that is, that God is kind of waiting in heaven hoping that people will learn something new about science, then that's not the way there should be a relationship. And the two-book idea, which was developed by people like Augustine and also by Galileo, because Galileo was secular-minded people think of Galileo as an anti-religious person, as an anti-Christian, just because he had some disagreements with some of the hierarchy of the church. Well, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church has never been the only religious expression of Christianity. There have always been other expressions of Christianity. But the Catholic Church happened to be the church that had the most universities and the most people dedicated to studying both theology, the Bible, science, and so forth. And so there's never an end to that process. No theologian, as Augustine defines theology, theology is faith seeking understanding. It's not faith coming to a complete understanding of itself. It's faith seeking understanding. You can't come to a complete understanding of God. So if you're going to expect, for instance, life beyond death, to live with God eternally, you're going to have to understand that even after you've lived with Him a couple of eternities, you're still not going to understand God because you're too limited a being. And people and scientists have more fights over scientific theories than some Christians have over theology. Probably not as many. But anyway, scientists have fights over things, you know. When I was born, there were a lot of scientists who did not yet accept Einstein's theory of relativity. And there were scientists who were preeminent who did not accept the Big Bang theory. Some of them were afraid that it was a religious philosophy because it was developed by a Catholic priest. But they eventually began to think that maybe this is the way to work out our knowledge of the universe. And so Christians should not get in the way of that. Just like they shouldn't have gotten in the way of Copernicus or Galileo. Now there's some Bible passages which anybody who has read the Bible can bring forward to try to get you to think that the Bible is not only talks about science, but it talks about science in a dumb, erroneous way, such as one of the things that Galileo had to contend with was the passage in the Bible which said that Joshua commanded the sun to stand still, and it stood still. Well, Galileo understood that scripture. He understood, first of all, that it was not a historical statement; it was a war poem that had been written or composed before the book of Joshua was ever written. And it's not talking about whether the sun moves or the earth moves. It's talking about God providentially giving Joshua the time to win his battle. And it's told in poetry. Well, if you interpret something that's told in poetry as though it were literal and you had to believe that, then Aristotle was correct. But if you, and since Aristotle is the greatest scientific authority for the medieval church, the Bible wasn't the scientific authority for the medieval church, it was Aristotle and Ptolemy. And fortunately, they were right about some things. You know, when I was little, I saw a film on Christopher Columbus. Most Americans still don't know the story of Christopher Columbus. But Christopher Columbus was supposed to have been this Italian who, by some kind of ingenious insight, came to the conclusion that the world was round. And so in this movie, he goes to Queen Isabella, and Queen Isabella sends him to her monks so that he can have a conversation with the monks. And in the scene, they're eating not poached eggs, but boiled eggs. So Columbus is in there and he looks over all of these monks and he picks up this egg and he says, "Now you see, the earth is like this egg. It is round." And the idea was supposed to be that those monks were hearing something for the first time. But Roman Catholic monks knew that the world was round hundreds of years before Columbus. There were some people in Europe who didn't know the world was round, but they were not educated people. Monks were educated people. And so this kind of haziness about the relationship between faith and science is what bothers me, because and so I don't come to any conclusion about scientific theories in my book, because that's not the purpose of my book. The purpose of my book is to get us to see that we shouldn't just get out in the middle and have a wrestling match over the relation between science and faith, that we should understand that those are two disciplines, that is, theology and faith, interpretation of the Bible and science, are two different disciplines. And sometimes science is going to come up with something that people of faith did not believe. But science has enough evidence for it that anybody with intelligence should believe it. Well, people confuse belief with faith. Those are two different things. You can go into a science class with a lot of faith and a few beliefs that do not hold up to scientific scrutiny. And then you can come to my office and cry because you've lost your faith. And I have to tell you, you haven't lost your faith. You've lost a silly belief. But you still have to keep watching, because all of these theories and beliefs are still in process of developing.